with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Phronesis Podcast. Thank you so much for checking in wherever you are in the world. Today, I have David Reyes, and he serves as Manager for Talent and Leadership Development at Southwest Airlines, where he oversees the leadership development programs, strategy, and execution. Before his work in talent development, he served in administration and higher education and continues to teach as an adjunct professor for communications and leadership classes. In 2021, David received his Doctorate of Education and studied the social responsibility and the efficacy of leadership educators and practitioners. David has been married to Madison for 8 years, and they have 2 children, Judah, 3, and Nora, 1 month. David, you are in it with a 1-month-old.
Yes, I'm just, the way I could describe, just tired all the time. It's like, it's a real thing, but you learn to just kind of live with the tired.
Oh, congratulations. That's so exciting. One interesting thing about parenting, we're a little further down the road. We have twin girls that are 14. We have a 16-year-old as well. We're kind of getting into this space where sleep deprivation is a thing again with these teenagers, where it's, can I stay out till 11 or 11:30? And we're used to going to bed at 9:30.
Yes.
Those 2 hours are important hours when you're getting up at 5:30 a.m. So it's been this really interesting space of, wow, we're in this kind of area where we're only getting 6-7 hours again. But I'm so excited for you. As you know, parenting is just your own little developmental laboratory, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I joked on my LinkedIn reflection after paternity leave that really I was still having to do some performance management conversations with my son, because I was just with him every day. But of course, I couldn't really put him on a PIP. There was just certain things. But it was really, I learned a lot about leadership just isolated in that. Because I was like, wow, I've really got to take note of these and apply this when I come back into the work, things like that.
For some reason, when my son was born, and my wife had said to me, she'd said, look, I want to make sure that you're present through this experience of parenting and parenthood. For some reason, my son's born, and that day I opened up my laptop and I just wrote a sentence. And then the second day I opened up my laptop and I wrote a sentence. And literally for 16 plus years, I've been opening up my laptop and I write a sentence. And a couple times in recent times, I've written my statement for the day is, you're challenging me to get better, because parenting can be such a mirror in so many ways, where even this week, I didn't intervene as I should have. I was struggling. And at the end of it, my wife was like, what was that? That was a fail. Yeah. You're in this kind of 24/7, 365 simulator to help you develop whatever it is you need to develop, whether that's patience, or that is emotional intelligence, or that is, I don't know, modeling curiosity for your children, modeling having difficult conversations. I mean, it's just if you look at it, it's a really cool developmental opportunity in and of itself.
I think for me, I was so focused a lot of times on routines. And even while I was away from work for a bit, I was like, okay, part of me wants to just get back on a routine, or at least get to that point where I like things can be routine. But I started just realizing that will probably never happen like as much as I want it to, or as much as we can build, things will change. And so I've started referring it more to the rhythm of just in a song, there's going to be tempo changes, different nuances to how things are going. And I just felt like, okay, if the rhythms are there, there might be some nuances within there, but I can't get wound up if that didn't happen at that exact time. It's just part of this rhythm. So definitely a work in progress as I'm thinking about this new season, but definitely excited for this season as well.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to this conversation because in recent times, at least, and it's in your bio, you'd made this transition from thinking about leader development and doing the academic work and doing leader development in the higher education context to a Fortune 500, Southwest Airlines, an incredible organization in many, many ways, incredible history to that organization in many, many ways. So I think today I'd love to just do a little bit on what are your observations of that transition? Because I think sometimes people in academia or higher ed don't necessarily, they think that their skills and their talents will transfer to corporate America. And then if there's anything that kind of caught your attention about the work at Southwest, we could talk a little bit about that. But let's talk about the transition first. What are some observation you have about making that jump from higher ed to corporate?
I love this, Scott, because I think about it a lot, because I have a lot of conversations about it, because people will reach out on LinkedIn or see that, hey, I see you've made the switch and things like that. I really enjoy talking because it was such a thought process for me when I was pursuing the doctorate program, and I was looking at what's out there, the discipline of leadership. I was getting really excited because, as you know, there's newer compared to some other disciplines. I mean, there's just like a work that's coming out. I mean, you're a great voice in this space, other podcasts or other articles I was reading often. So I was really excited about where this work was going to go. And then I just started thinking about, in an organization context and just business, I was not a business major. I really thought, okay, maybe education will probably be my path. And I felt my last math class was called math. So if that gives you any indication of where I was. So I was like, I probably am not going to venture much into there. But then I started understanding and identifying this world of learning and development and talent development and organizational change. I started looking into all these things and realizing like, wow, there's a lot of similarities to what I've been studying and what I've been looking at. And how I can apply it in those contexts. And so it was really just a space where Southwest was seeking leadership development facilitators. And I said, okay, I think I can do that. I feel like that's a space I love. And I remember coming into the space, and I think historically, there hadn't been a lot of educators that were brought into this space. It was typically people that had maybe come from the operation here or that had been in leadership in other spaces that kind of transitioned into these spaces. And so here I was, and obviously it's still a newer thing to say, oh, wow, my major was leadership or my study was leadership. It's usually was embedded. And so I remember the transition being something of like, well, I studied this. I think this is something that I value. And so they were really cautious with, are you going to bring in a lot of these academic terms? Like, I mean, it was really these conversations. And I said, no, I get that. And you have to check yourself because you're coming from defending your dissertation and having to make sure you're using all of these terms and making sure you're calling back to the data. And so I've had to the first thing was contextualizing everything that I've done, but not dismissing everything that I've done.
Yes.
I remember, Scott, sitting at a conference room, and we were going through, here's kind of our next leadership class that we're going to be doing. And the other thing that was a new thing is in higher ed, if you ran a leadership development program, you were the coordinator, you were the designer, developer, you did everything from start to finish.
You probably went to Costco to buy all of the food as well.
Yes. You were really needing to think of everything when I came into Southwest, and so fortunate that Southwest as a whole has really invested a lot, and they hold in high regard leadership development and training and development. And it's been amazing to see, but you had to come in and like, oh yeah, we have a team that designs the content. We have a team that develops the slides. We have a team of project managers that make sure that is happening. And then it comes to the facilitator team. We talk about it, we help make it come alive. And then we have people that are making sure that classes are scheduled and all this stuff. And I'm like, so you're telling me like I could just read this and, and I didn't have to do any of that. And so I had found that was really a neat thing, but I was also looking at some of the content. And of course, it was another team that was writing this. They were here on site, but I'm like, okay, I want to get to know them because this is rich content. And I was simultaneously still an adjunct. And I was like, this is content that I could easily apply to my undergrad, even graduate classes.
Yes.
But it was hard to like sell that because they were like, this is just what we do. It's just, and I'm like, man, there is something here. And so my immediate thought was like, how do we get our leaders credit for this class? Because this is really rich stuff and it was rooted in a lot of research. So that was one of the cool things I noticed was like, oh, wow, I have a space here. I think this is really where I could bring in some of that. So I was really excited about that. And then getting to meet some of our developers and designers and seeing the research and the time that they were putting into this content. And as I started working here, I ended up fortunately being able to move into a leader role over the team of facilitators. And so going from buddy to boss, which was a whole nother concept of leadership that we now teach, but that was a new thing. But being able to close that gap between the developers and the facilitators, even though it was great that we had teams doing everything, I think that was so helpful for me to help bridge because as a facilitator, it said, hey, we can make it come alive. We can do all the tips and tricks to make sure these learners are engaged. But if we don't understand where this is being rooted from or research, like it's going to be hard on a break when they come and ask us a question. And we're like, we don't have a paragraph for this. Like it's just going to be. So I wanted to close the gap. So that's been something that's been really exciting. And it's been a really cool part of the transition.
I think in my work in organizations, because similar to you, I'm not embedded in an organization right now, but I'm interfacing with some fairly large organizations. And it's fascinating. It's incredible, the resources and the person developing the slides and the person doing this part of it and that part of it. But I love what you're saying, because if that team is not coordinated and in many ways of one mind, it can also present its own little challenges. But I also very, very much appreciate what you said about, at times, I think we're translators. We're not going to necessarily say, James McGregor Burns in 1978. That's not.
Yes.
However, leadership is one of the most observed yet least understood phenomena on earth. People can kind of get that. You can frame up that question and people will have a nice turn and buzz for a good 5 minutes. I think at times it's about us translating it in a way that it's accessible, it's digestible, and it's rooted in really good, solid foundation. But I think where a lot of academics, when they interface with individuals in corporate America or in nonprofits or other organizations, how do we truly make it actionable? Because these people are leaving that room and then actually going back to work and leading. And you can't say Fred Fiedler and contingency theory.
Yes.
No.
Yeah, exactly. They're not going to care so much about the dates and the names. To your point, I think I've had to understand this. I remember coming in and saying, we typically didn't hire a lot of educators into these roles. And I remember just asking them as courses, they got to know me and I wasn't all that scary coming in, hopefully, but just recognizing like, why was that? And I think it was this propensity or this maybe thought of our desire is not to be the sage on the stage, but to be the guide on the side. And I think what I learned from that is really so much of our audience is individuals that are working in so many different contexts, so many different arenas, and we might have them all in one. I may have an operations agent, a customer service agent, ramp agent. I may have a pilot, and I may have someone from the financial planning and analysis team, all in one room, sharing about leadership concepts. Each of them are going to be taking it into totally different contexts. And so being able to understand, like, I can share, but I really want to facilitate where you're coming from. How are you seeing this and reflecting on this type of thing now, to be able to say, hey, let's think through that. And then maybe call them back to, here's some of the modules, here's some of the frameworks, but how can you use this practically? It may not be cut and paste in your specific area.
Yep.
And it creates a challenge because there's times where you get a lot of the how does this apply to me question. And so you can't do that with every single person sometimes within the allotted time. But what you can do is just learn from the wisdom in the room. And I think it goes back to you use the word wonderfully, this
Yeah.
idea of being rooted in that is like, I think that's what helps. And when you know you're rooted in that, you can facilitate the wisdom in the room and still have a thread around it. And you're not nervous coming into it because you know where to go. You know where the point A to point B is going to be. And so that's what I really have loved and really have observed a lot is exactly what you said, understanding that contextualization, but also recognize that within the organization, you're having to contextualize it with different work groups and truly guiding them. What's the beautiful moments are those moments in the breaks where you're just having someone that you could just tell they're wrestling with something or I didn't speak up, but this is really happening and they share their specific situation on their team or their dynamics. And you just start to be able to share the things that you've learned and contextualize it for them. And so that's been really a neat way for me to frame everything.
I oftentimes will go down the road of growth mindset and fixed mindset. Let's just say, hypothetically, and I'm not going to go into Carol Dweck.
Yeah.
It's not going to,
Yes.
I'm going to give a quick definition of growth, quick definition of fixed, give a couple stories on each that are personal to kind of wrap people in. And then for some of these organizations, I have never served as a tech. I've never worked on a car or sold a car or led a team, an automotive dealership. I've never done any of that work. But what I can do is I can say, how does this apply? How does this concept apply in your world? That kind of guide on the side, to your point, there's a transition here that I love that phrasing, not the sage on the stage, but the guide on the side. Because to your point, you probably haven't served as a gate agent or an operations individual. However, we can prop up some pretty cool concepts, some really cool work, communicate it in a way that's very translatable, and then say, how does this apply? And in the process, what I've found when I have that guide on the side, I end up learning just as much as everyone else in the room, just a different type of learning because I'm learning the context and I'm getting rooted in the context a little more deeply. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I love that you bring in the growth versus fixed mindset because that's been something that I have really tried to anchor on through all of our development of these programs. And even now, as we're working to refine our leadership programs, just as we need to often, just to, what are things going on externally? What are things that are happening? What are the trends that we're seeing from employee surveys? How are we translating those into our development and what themes are we seeing? I'll share a story that I think captured it so well for me is we were going through a crucial conversations class. That's one of the sections that we share out in our development program. And I remember we started talking about emotions and the way that we speak with emotions. And so and we're in a room with a lot of different leaders. And I had a leader, operations leader, and really his team, they do the work. They're not sitting around a lot of meetings. They're not having a lot of conversations. They're just doing the work. And I remember he boldly shared in the class, he said, I don't think this applies to me because I don't get emotional. And I said, okay, thank you for sharing that. Let's talk. He's like, yeah, anytime that someone on my team is getting emotional, this was him sharing this, but he said, I usually get a lady to come and help because I really, and this was him. And I think culturally for him, he just never felt like that was comfort. And he felt, okay, maybe my female counterpart could maybe do this better. And so I could tell the room just got a little bit tense. So this was really, and it was fun as a facilitator to see these things, but it's okay. You have to see where this is going. So obviously it's super fixed mindset, but in the moment it's not like, okay, let's break away. Let's talk about growth and fixed mindset. But you start to identify this and immediately after that, or very shortly after that, we played a video part of the curriculum. It was a video of someone sharing their story of how they'd been rejected for jobs and passed over for jobs time and time again, just sharing how they had to overcome that messaging in their head, the stories that they were telling themselves. And he raises his hand. I mean, this was like 20 minutes after he had just said that. He raises his hand and he said, that story, he said, that was my story. He said, in the previous company I was in, they told me I would never be a leader. He said, and I finally came here And Scott, this man started bawling. He started
Wow.
crying. And in the whole class, you could just tell was just like jaws open because this is the man that just said, I don't need this. Like, I'm not an emotional guy. And then he's the first one to cry in the class. It was a beautiful moment, but it reminded me of just like that one that you don't see that transformation obviously all the time. But I think it just reminded me of that coming in from not in that moment. There was not that, okay, something I'm going to say is going to really pivot this conversation, but it was like, okay, we're going to sit with that thought. We're going to allow this module to keep taking place, but we're going to come back to these elements. And obviously, there was a lot of safety built up in the room, obviously, for him to even share that. And so that's all around it. But I just thought it was powerful to just see growth mindset in a way that it wasn't just us sharing that principle, but it happened organically, again, using the guide on the side kind of approach.
Yeah. Well, your story for me brings up, I think, another shift in transition at times is when you are that guide on the side, you're facilitating. And when you're facilitating and creating that space where people feel like they can speak up and share, you're also a little bit in improv because in that moment, you're like, okay, what do I do here? Do I
Yep.
confront that? Do I let the group confront that? Do I let it go for right now? And so I think that at times can be a little bit worrisome for some educators or for some individuals that we are now going to facilitate versus me doing a one-way download. That's safer. That's easier. I can download to all of you and then walk out of the room. When I'm facilitating, you're in improv sometimes.
Yeah.
Some of the things that come up.
Yep.
Oh, okay, where do we go from here?
Oh, yeah. A lot of my team will sometimes, hey, did you hear about what's happening over here? What's happening? No, but I'm assuming a leader just vented out in class about what's happening over there or whatever it may be. And yeah, it is a lot of that, the improv. And I love that because I'm a big fan of improv. And actually, we've done some improv training with some of our team because we've realized like that's been something that yes and approach has been really, really helpful. I have definitely seen where coming into this role, I was really nervous. It's okay, I can prepare all I can. But if I didn't listen for those cues that were coming in from a learner, it's so easy to say, thank you for that comment and just keep going. You didn't really listen to that comment because what that person just said, half the room's thinking about. They can directly relate to that. And so I think a lot of it too is not only the contextualization of the roles, but what's happening across the company. We have to be really clear on what are the values of our organization? What's the messaging that's coming from our senior leaders? Because it's not always going to say, hey, here's your notes of what we're going to be sharing in our next kind of all organization meeting. These are the things that we have to be picking up on and understanding kind of the landscape of what's happening to be able to keep that messaging going. And these are priorities. Let's align them back to the company and their team specific. So there's so much of that simultaneously that has to be in our heads. And I've always told the team that, hey, if we linger on one module so long that we're like, we may have to cut something, I think in that moment we decide because it's very clear there's something happening here that we just need to talk. And so I love those moments. And I think it's a lot of times in education too, but I think it just happens so much more real time because it's literally things that people are like dealing with situations that as soon as this training's over, they're ready to go and try this out, or they're able to go try this out right after.
Yes. And embedded in our conversation right now, I think I think this could be a little bit of a fixed mindset perspective among people thinking about the transition to corporate. I think at times there can be this narrative, this soundtrack in our own minds of, gosh, I don't know anything about the automotive industry, or I don't know anything about construction, or I don't know anything about airlines and piloting. I wouldn't be a fit in that. When at least how you're communicating right now, a good percentage of what you learned in your experiences in the doctoral program and in higher education, humans are humans. They translate regardless of, obviously there's these contextual specifics that we have to be aware of, we have to be attuned to, we have to learn. And crucial conversations, that's happening in a lot of different industries, that training, and it cuts across because it's a fundamental challenge for human beings.
Yeah. And I think that's when you get to lean on the wisdom in the room and being okay with saying, you know what, you mentioned that kind of acronym. I'm not really sure what that means.
Yep.
Can you expound on that for those that may not know, including myself, and talk about that, being able to be okay with saying, I'm not unfamiliar. I see this a lot, even in leadership. Scott, one thing that I've been thinking of lately is I think about, man, I'd love to be able to do more with leadership and to share more in leaders. And I think oftentimes you feel like I have to have led a lot of things, or I've had to, and obviously have been in some of those spaces, but I remember being in grad school and this speaker had come into a guest lecture class, and he was a consultant, advisor, did all this stuff. And I was like, wow, I really think what you do is cool. Like, I'd love to explore that. And I remember him telling me, you got to put in your time. Don't worry about this stuff. Just lead, go and do all this stuff. And I remember a little bit being bummed because I was just like, that's annoying, because I'm like, I feel like maybe I have a voice in there, but I'm younger. Yes, I know. And I've thought the very same thing about leadership in general. And there's so many people that have done it and for years and 20 plus years, 30 plus years, all the years of experience. I could never do that. But I read Kouzes and Posner's Learning Leadership book. And that, for me, it's been around for a while, but for me, it just opened up this idea of, okay, I'm learning as I go. And that's the beauty of it. And that's how I think we all can align on that. We're all learning, but it's like, I can approach a conversation sometimes with more questions than I do answers, and I'm still very effective.
Yes.
And I still can make a case for myself. So I've gotten a lot more confidence in that. And my hope is that in the future I can, because I've done some workshops, and similar to you, Scott, I've done a few things and getting to learn from individuals like you that have paved the way. But I'm just like, man, there are opportunities. It's just having the confidence to say, hey, I'm learning along with everyone.
Yes. Yes.
So I've just found so much beauty in that.
So well said. So Tony Middlebrooks, good friend of mine, teaches at Florida, was at Delaware for years. He has a statement that he uses at the beginning of every class. I've adopted using this again, this week I'm in 3 or 4 different organizations, whether it's accounting, law, surgery, it's across the board. It's a little jarring at times, the shifts that I'm making,
The different contexts. Yeah.
But I always begin with, and this is what Tony said, and this is what he taught me. I don't know better. I know different. You know your craft incredibly. I know the literature on leadership and what great leaders do. And together we can come to a better understanding of this thing, because ultimately what we want to do is create a great environment for our people. That's our shared objective. That's our shared goal. So I really try to honor their knowledge, not in a boastful way, honor my knowledge, but just say, look, we know different things. Let's do this. Let's explore. But then that also sidelines me from putting myself in this box of having to be the sage on stage, where I am learning with you. And you know what? I haven't had that statement fail me yet. People appreciate that. People say, I say, look, there's an incredible amount of wisdom in the room. Some of you have been leading teams for 20 years. I know different, and we all know different. So let's explore this. And all of a sudden, everyone just like chills in. So his statement, I am so thankful that he said that to me. I think it was in a podcast episode. It took the pressure off of me as well.
Yes, it does. And I think, and that's where I learned a lot coming into this space and recognizing I want to facilitate these, not only just the conversations and the learnings, but I want to facilitate the relationships in the room, right?
Yes.
To just recognize you're
that.
Seeing the networks happen. And sometimes it could be the most simple thing, but there's so much the juices that flow out of that, right? Or just so much more than, oh, wow, I had this whole really like incredible deck of stuff that I was going to share, but all of a sudden we just need to land here. And I think I've just really enjoyed that. And I think it's given me a lot of confidence being able to speak to people in different industries and different organizations. Because just like you said, we're all human and we're all needing to navigate in this space. We come with different vantage points. It's not to say that it's more or less or better or not as good, but it's just a different vantage point. We can be confident enough to say that we have that. Yeah, I love that.
And we're modeling. I think in some ways we're modeling for the individuals, the learners, a little bit of vulnerability. And I think a myth at times is, oh, leaders have the answers. And I actually come across that fairly often, where someone is psychologically putting the pressure on themselves to come up with the answer forward. When for some of these puzzles that these folks are working, they're complex adaptive challenges, and there isn't an answer. There's no person in the world we can call right now to say, hey, how do I fix this? And they say, oh, do these 4 things and you're all set. No, that's not a thing.
And I also hear And it's funny you talk about just the weight that holds. Oftentimes, it's a very common sentiment, but you'll hear people don't leave companies, they leave leaders. There's elements of our program that we say that. And I remember thinking as a new leader coming in, I'm like, that is a lot of weight. So you're telling me that if anybody leaves, it's on me. And so you start to almost position this leader into thinking like they have to keep all the balloons in the air and making sure that this person, where instead, developing people and empowering people is about creating a space where they have ownership and they have a responsibility to be able to adjust. And so I think that sentiment is true in a lot of ways, but I do recognize this imbalance of weight sometimes that is put on leaders, where instead it's really leaders empowering and equipping their people to really think critically, to approach things with an ownership mindset, all of those things that I'm like, if you have done all those things, because there's people that leave the companies for different reasons. And I think it's you just do what you can with what you have in that moment, but being able to just challenge those people, because I think it can be really easy to say, okay, I'm sorry you're struggling. Let me fix all these things, or let me do all these things. And this next person's miffed because that happened. And so you're like, let me change it back. And so it can be so easy to get in that mindset when we're really like, no, psychological safety is there, but Edmondson also talks about the accountability in the same way, right? It's like we have, it's both of those. So that's just another thing I think about a lot as we're speaking to leaders.
Yep. And that's a whole fun conversation in of itself, the psychological safety. And because I think sometimes, especially back to the complex adaptive challenges, the leader, in my mind, in that instance, at times is elevating the right question for the group to work. And does the group have the psychological safety to have kind of the knockdown, drag out conversation about what is our best guess as to how to proceed forward? No one has the answer. So helping leaders with some of those tricks and tools and mindsets of, oh, okay, this is one, I probably need to elevate this to the team. And again, I got to create the space where people feel like they can have that conversation. Yeah. We've all been in the meeting where the leader thinks they've had the conversation.
Exactly.
But they haven't, oftentimes because of their behavior and not creating a space of psychological safety. It's so much fun. And I think we have a shared vision. I'm not putting a vision on you, but how do we better prepare people to do this work? Because it's hard. It's not easy. It's like having a 1-month-old. It's awesome and it's incredible and it's cool. And it's also hard.
Yes. And I really do think, Scott, there is such a bridge between the academic space and the organizational leadership space. There's so many bridges in that, because I hear it from both sides, both leaders in higher ed that kind of longing for that, and those that are really top learning and development professionals that are seeking some of that guidance. And it's like, I just think there's such a bridge that still needs to be discovered in a lot of ways. And I'm excited for conversations like this.
I love the perspective you're bringing to the table. It's that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone, for me at least, of I'm rooted in the theory. I understand it. I get it. And I'm also trying to operationalize it. So I'm going to need to shift a little bit to help ensure that these concepts truly do help these leaders make sense in real time of some of what they're navigating, to really, it really truly does help individuals navigate some of the complexities of their work more elegantly or with greater intentionality. I love it. And so this is the first of a few conversations we are going to have.
Yes.
So you're okay with that?
Absolutely. Well, and I appreciate the space for the conversation, but also the way that I think you're at a really good spot where you're bringing in something. Again, I've been listening to your show since I was a doctoral student trying to examine this world. And so I love being able to say, hey, there's a spot for me on Scott Allen's podcast still. I love it. This is great. So it's fun. So thank you for that.
As you know, I always wind down by saying what's caught your attention lately. And it could be something you've been streaming, something you've been listening to, something you've been reading. Could have to do with what we've discussed. It may not have anything to do with what we've just discussed. It could be that you've been binge watching Bridgerton. Who knows? Yeah. But, what is that for you that listeners might find interesting?
Well, not a lot of TV time for me right now.
No.
It's been a lot of just holding down the fort at work and then when I go home. I think for me, I've really been recently thinking a lot about the complexity that is personal brand, actually. And it's been funny because it's been a highly requested topic, actually, by a lot of teams and departments that reach out to our team to say, hey, we'd love to have something on personal brand. I've had a lot of dialogue with people about what personal brand is. And I think how it also attributes to your personal values and for me, it's my faith and how those marry in a lot of ways, because personal brand, I think, is much more than just vanity seeking or positioning yourself in a certain way. But personal brand to me is really understanding, hey, what are my values? What do I really value? What do I do? And how am I navigating that? I probably think about it in terms of, I have a lot of conversations on LinkedIn with individuals, like we mentioned earlier, that are in transition, that are navigating kind of those spaces, educators that are really they're seeing the work of learning and development. They're like, oh, wait, there's some similarities there. And so being able to just understand, okay, I don't want to change who I am, but I want to adjust different streams of, your passions, professions, and your personality all coming together. So I've been thinking a lot about that, and I just listening to how people define it and why it matters. And so that could be another conversation, but I've been thinking about that a lot. I do a lot of podcasts, but I wish it was more fun than probably things like that, like a show. But right now, that's what I do for fun. It's my commutes and podcasts. And when I'm not listening to Phronesis, of course, doing that.
That is a really cool topic in and of itself, personal brand. And there's identity shift involved in some of that. Like when I started posting in a little bit more and more, there were demons in my mind of, and when I decided to do the podcast and put that out into the world, there were demons in my mind. And that in and of itself is a really interesting conversation. The person.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're telling me. I think about, you mentioned LinkedIn, but it's interesting. Like I'll post something and people at work, it's like, oh yeah, I saw your post, and it's like, oh man, am I getting too much real estate in your mind right now? You start to get in your head about that. But then you hear about someone down the road, they're like, okay, hey, I've been wanting to reach out to you. I see something. And so I've just been like, man, I'm taking it as an opportunity. I'm recognizing that, I'm not trying to brand anything, but I'm just wanting to try to create space for the conversation. And it's led to some incredible conversations. So yeah, but yeah, you're having to fight some of that.
Sir, I appreciate your time today. Thank you for the good work that you do. Again, I'd love to have other conversations down the road. So much fun and much respect for the fact that you're bringing the perspective you do to the table and gaining the experience of, okay, how do we operationalize this and truly prepare people to be more successful literally tomorrow? I think that's it's God's work. However, listeners define that, it might just be karma points in the universe. I don't care. You're earning karma credit, whatever it is. It's good work.
It's good human work. We got it. So I love it. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you so much to David. What a fun conversation. Just really, really enjoyed that dialogue. The practical wisdom for me, guide on the side. I just loved that phrase. I had not heard that before, and that is something that is truly going to stick with me. We are not always that individual in the front of the room who knows it all. At times, we are that individual who's helping to facilitate the dialogue and the learning. And I think that's so true in leadership. It's true as an educator. And David, I look forward to our next conversation. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for checking in. As always, if you like what we got going on, share it with others. Be well. Bye-bye. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.